Hello, Justin Dean from the Sunday Group.
Hey man, how's it going?
It's going well. I'm glad to talk to you today. So, Justin, you are the guru of church PR communications, and not just because you've read about it, but you've lived it in some intense, extreme scenarios.
I'm a survivor. Yes.
Survivor, yes. That is true. Not just like, yeah, like you survived it. So there's a lot of, I mean, like the most common question I'm seeing on Facebook now is like not just what do we do, but like how do we communicate it to our people? Like we're getting, churches are getting mandates from governors now
Sure.
saying don't go to church or don't
Yeah.
hold church services. So I don't want this entire conversation to be about coronavirus, but today is when like all this stuff is sort of coming to a head. And but before you give your absolute what you should do in PR, like communication, crisis communication, can you explain why you have the scars that give you the knowledge and the wisdom?
Yeah, sure. I mean, little history for me is I was the communications director up at Mars Hill Church in Seattle, Washington with Mark Driscoll. I was there for about 5 years and, oversaw kind of all communications and marketing, social media, but in particular, PR, was the spokesperson for the company, for the church and the companies for, the last year there while things kind of, wound down. And we can go into the details of that if you want, but I mean, I think people can Google it and figure it out if they don't know what we're talking about. It is 5 years, 6 years removed now, so I'm
Well, explain a
finding
little bit.
less,
Yeah, I mean,
more and more people don't know about it.
yeah, explain it a little bit. I think it's worth explaining. Like that
Yeah, I
wasn't
mean,
just a matter of communicating from a big church because you were there,
yeah,
like you were there in the years prior to the meltdown.
yeah,
And so, like you understand communication at a big church with
sure,
multiple campuses. It's highly influential with a lot of eyeballs.
yeah,
And then also like threw that into, what do you do
right.
when the church isn't meeting anymore?
Yeah, I mean, like handling the beast that was Marshall Church alone, just communications there was insane. I mean, we had a good 45-person team of anywhere from editors, writers, designers, video guys, people on social media team. Like it was a massive team that made it all work. But we had, 15 churches in 5 states. We had professional music label, a book publishing company. We had the Resurgence. We had events, large scale conferences, and we were one of the fastest growing and largest churches at the time. And so tons of communications coming in and out of the church, and was part of the team that kind of oversaw all that. So definitely know how that works. My background before the church was doing the same thing, but for tech startups.
Oh, really?
Was
I didn't know
in the
that about you.
tech startup scene before I went into ministry.
Cool.
Yeah. So, kind of knew a little bit of what I was doing when I joined ministry, but had no clue really when it came to like church communications. Had to learn that along the way. And then certainly when the church really, it came under just enormous scrutiny from the press and bloggers, and kind of imploded a bit as people trusted us less and less because they're hearing things and they're comparing it to what we're saying, and it just became a big mess, and pastors would leave and take people with them, and it just kind of deteriorated quickly, and ended with our senior pastor Mark Driscoll quitting and leaving the church, and that left us with options of what to do. And really, our succession plan, had anything were to happen to them, would be our churches would just become autonomous and go their own way. And so that's what happened. I mean, they're all still alive today. They're just not Marshall churches. That they're all their own thing, can do their own thing. We split up all the assets, and they went their own way. But through that, we were on the front page of the New York Times twice, all over Seattle news. I was on the TV almost nightly for a month there, talking about the issues and the accusations and things like that, and trying to communicate as well through that. And I was one of the last 4 employees all the way through the last day until we closed the doors, and then it just was no more. So, I lived through all that. Definitely was a hard time for our family and things like that. But,
Yeah.
just trying to communicate well through that, and really to put on The whole world was watching, particularly a lot of Christians, but the world was watching. When you're on the front page of New York Times, people enjoy seeing churches crumble and big leaders crumble. And so trying to find a way to say, not only here's what's happening, but hey, here's how this reflects on Jesus and Christians, because everyone's watching. I mean, that was the biggest, trickiest part. But
Yeah, I bet. I mean, like, and not just the world is like the capital W world, like the rest of the world, but I mean also the Christian world watching,
yeah,
and you have the factions who are like, good, I didn't like Driscoll anyway, and I didn't like what Marshall was doing
right,
anyway. Like, I
yeah,
didn't agree with this doctrine, and so I'm glad that they're having. So you have
right.
this like infighting within the family.
Oh, it created so much infighting. I mean, it still does to this day. I mean, I still get people who blast me on my personal Twitter, just because they're like, you were a part of that, so I hate you and everything you do. It's like, all
Okay, don't come to the conference.
right,
Speaking of, okay, so can you talk about what you do now? 6 years on.
yeah. Came out of Mars Hill. My family and I moved to Atlanta from Seattle, and almost immediately we started a conference called That Church Conference, where it really began as me and a few friends who all worked at churches doing the same thing. We wanted to just put on a workshop, like a one-day workshop local to Atlanta. Nothing existed, still doesn't kind of exist, that teaches communications and marketing, like practical tactics to help people in those roles. And so we put that on, and we just didn't know what to expect. But people from all over were flying in, buying tickets, coming to this thing. We were just filling a void that was there, and a need that was there. Churches at the time, this was almost 6 years ago, were still figuring out what it means to even have a communications person or social media person. They saw things like what happened to Mark Driscoll and Mars Hill, and said, okay, we need someone in this role. But we were still trying to figure out social media and things like that. And so it came at a good time. It's grown since then. We're entering into our 6th year. This year's conference in September will be a huge deal. A lot of people are already signed up to come. And we're just continuing to teach churches practical ways to be better communicators and marketers, and just the importance of that role and what it means to the church as a whole. And it's exciting. I mean, that's kind of what I run. It's my day job now, is running that. Also wrote a book, a little bit about my experiences at Mars Hill, but really it's a practical book on how to create a crisis communications plan for your church, knowing that, hey, anything can happen. Since Mars Hill, we've seen pretty much every major celebrity pastor has fallen in a way. There's only a couple left, and honestly, maybe some of them are a ticking time bomb, who knows. But it's amazing what's happened over the last 5 years with large churches and pastors with a huge following, and what's happened there. And none of them have been prepared, because most of them actually called me to help them. So it's kind of interesting.
Yes, and so what's interesting to me is knowing this much about church communications and how unique it is from just a general marketing person or a copywriter or whatever. The church communications role and the need for communications in churches takes a really unique kind of person to do it really well. Like when I was at Life Church, I worked closely with Lori Bailey. Do you know Lori? Life Church?
Lori's awesome.
She's super sharp. She's like intimidatingly smart and
Yeah.
sharp, but also frustratingly humble about it.
Totally.
She's
wait,
like, yeah, she like asked my opinion. She would ask my opinion about stuff, and I'm like, Lori, I'm here to live. Like,
well, plus she's over communications for Life Church, which alone is like amazing. But she does it remotely. Like, she's in Austin or something. It's incredible how she gets that done.
Yeah, and so like that's the first time I really. I mean, of course, that was the first time I was at any church of any size. But that was the first time I interacted with somebody in that kind of role. And then I realized how multifaceted and multi-skilled that role is. Like, it's not just copy. It's not just a market understanding marketing and web presence stuff. There's so much more like a understanding tone and how we talk and how we communicate things that are difficult to communicate. And like not just how we communicate the things that are difficult to communicate, but also the so many different channels and things to communicate to a relatively small community compared to, maybe like a business that has tens of thousands of customers that are all kind of, just sort of
Yeah.
like light touch customers. Whereas a church, like these people that come in, interact with our brand, for lack of a better term, every week. They invest in us. They give lots of money to us, and so that communication with those people is really really important. So before we get into the crisis stuff, can you tell me what you think are some of, I'm going to blindside you with this, and you're going to have to think of it. What do you think are some of the absolute must-have traits if somebody wants to do really well in church communications?
Yeah, actually, there's a whole chapter in my book. The book's called PR Matters. You can find it on Amazon or churchprbook.com. And I devoted a whole chapter of, hey, if you're convinced I need a communications person at our church, whether it's a staff person or volunteer, need to hire someone, who should I look for? And you're absolutely right that it's easy to hire someone who can manage the website, post and schedule things on your social media. That's fine. You can get anybody to do that. But what you really need is someone who can not only communicate well what's happening at your church. You know, we say telling the story of what Jesus is doing, you know, in your church and through your church, getting that message out, like that needs to be communicated well. But you need someone who's going to be able to not only be proactive and market with that stuff, but be reactive as well. And so, you know, ideally that's a person who can handle a crisis well, who can be cool and calm, who can have a presence, both, you know, written and on camera and in person. It all comes down to building relationships. And this person needs to not be an introvert behind a computer, or a receptionist who also is over your communications, or a worship pastor who, you know, is doing this on the side. Like, this needs to be a dedicated person who takes it seriously, and that this is, you know, something that they think about day in and day out. So when it comes down to it, our whole goal of church, right, is to serve people and to preach the gospel. Like, that's why we exist. That's what we're doing. And so you put so much effort into building your Sunday sermon each week, and you get that out to whoever's sitting there in your building. But this is 2020. Like, there's an enormous opportunity to reach outside those walls and to build relationships with those people, to actually build disciples with those people outside of your walls. And that's, you know, a communications person needs to be able to take that and handle that well, be able to use social media in a way that's building relationships, be able to use, you know, build your email list and things like that, be able to have a good presence to your website, but also out in the community and actually building relationships with local businesses, other churches, things like that. I mean, that's, you know, holistically, you need to be looking at all those different angles when it comes to what is your communications person or your department going to be doing. And then also, hey, if something happens, a crisis hits, coronavirus, or an accusation that's actually true. I mean, I deal with churches all the time who someone's disgruntled for some reason and they just throw out an accusation, and you know, they swear up and down that it's not true and there's no proof. And so we kind of go down that path with them, and it can cripple a church. I mean, half of the stuff that crippled Mars Hill wasn't true. It was just accusations, or just people screaming loud and breaking confidentiality clauses for church discipline cases and saying their side, but we're not able to say our side, things like that. You need to be prepared for that stuff. You need someone who can take the helm and walk through those communications well when something like that happens.
So when crises do happen, there's all sorts of, I mean, there's big stuff like coronavirus, or a moral failure from a pastor, from whatever. But there's also small stuff like kid gets hurt and kind of gets into the news, or family gets upset and it maybe doesn't hit the news, but it gets around the community, like the church community. Right. That's all stuff that needs to be handled, or at least if not handled by the church communications person, consulted, so that the pastor knows like some good ways to handle it. Because some of that stuff is just like that needs to be handled from the pulpit, but it needs to be like, it really does need to have the insight from a really experienced or talented, skilled communications person. So
being
what are some
able
steps
to put that into a plan and follow that plan is huge, especially if you're able to have that plan in place ahead of time, or as much of it as you can in place ahead of time. Because when the stuff hits, you know, especially like a moral failure, or, you know, any kind of crisis, you're in the moment of it. You don't have time to really build a plan. You need to follow the plan at that point. And sometimes you only have days, if not hours,
Mm-hmm.
particularly if news and media gets involved. But not even at that level. Like you need to be able to control the message. And I don't mean script things under the rug, as when it comes to controlling the message, but being able to actually tell the truth and control the perception that people have, so that it aligns with the truth. That's what it's all about when you're communicating anything of a negative value.
So what does a crisis communication plan look like for a church? What are some elements of it, or how would you define it first, and then what, like,
Yeah.
are there multiple elements, or is it like a step-by-step kind of thing, or is it this is how we always talk about issues? I mean, like, what's a plan look like?
It's kind of all of that. I mean, ideally you can do all of that. It starts with saying, okay, who's going to be the point person, spokesperson when something happens, and that there might be categories to that. All right. Okay, category A crisis, it's going to be the senior pastor, or, so-and-so executive pastor. Everything else, it might be the communications manager. Like, you decide who. Again, it's got to be someone who can be cool, someone who can be, on camera, who can communicate well in person, who can write well, who can handle it, someone who has authority to actually make things, happen on the fly. And so defining that ahead of time is huge, because the last thing you want to do is try to convene a committee together to decide who's going to be in charge. Like, that needs to be done already, because you just don't have time for that. You don't have time for people to be infighting and things like that. And then, from there you can break out, okay, what I tell people is start thinking now through all of the different scenarios that are possible at your church. It's going to be a little different per church, but a lot of it's going to be the same. One of those can be something like the coronavirus. Like, churches should have already had a written plan in place for what happens if there's, a national or a global kind of pandemic like this, how, that affects maybe our Sunday services. What's our plan for that? That can be, almost 99% written out. Who's in charge? What are we going to say? What's the plan if Sunday services are effective? How are we going to communicate it? On what channels are we going to communicate it? You can probably even write out some of those statements now and just leave parts blank. Do 99% of the work now, so that they're in the moment. You can act quick. I mean, as of yesterday, the coronavirus was like not so much a big deal. Now today, we literally have a travel ban to Europe. The NBA has closed, canceled all events. Churches are in a panic now to cancel Sunday services and figure out online streaming and how to communicate that. I mean, it's a nightmare, but honestly, you should be able to just pull it off the shelf, open up your Dropbox, wherever you got it, and start plugging in the information, and coolly and calmly be able to communicate things well about this, because you've already got it. You've already got a plan in place for this.
Yeah. So for all the listeners who are like, well, crap.
Yeah. We didn't do that.
Well, COVID-19 is here. It's almost COVID-20.
Yeah.
And I'm not sure that I don't think that's how it works, but
I don't know.
And so that, like, they don't have a plan.
Yeah.
We didn't make this soon enough, this conversation. They didn't see your book in time and all that kind of stuff.
Right.
Number one, they can buy your book. There'll be a link in the YouTube description below, and whoever,
it'll solve all their problems for next
will be the answer if they can read fast enough.
Yeah.
But if they don't have that, and they're like, hey, I need to, like, my pastor said, hey, like, what are we going to do? I need an answer.
Yeah.
What am I going to talk? So what do they do if they don't have a plan in place?
Honestly, the best advice at this point I can give is to just chill out and calmly think things through. What you don't want to do is communicate something and then have to change that. Like, literally, had we communicated yesterday that everything's cool, Sunday services are going to happen, don't worry, it's not even really affecting us here yet. Today, you would have to retract that and say, okay, we can't have services, because literally in Seattle right now, they're like the mayor has said any event over 250 people cannot happen. Like, the government is saying you cannot have church if it's over 250 people. And so whether they want to or not, they've got to close services down. And so they've got to communicate that. They've got to communicate whether they have online options. They need to carefully think through, okay, if we don't have people in person where we're giving them a call to give, How is that going to, drop? Like, I guarantee giving across the board is going to drop, because we know that people give more when they're in person and they have that prompt, even though there's so many online options to give. It's just a fact. And so, for a church, you've got to be able to make those options readily available, communicate those well, communicate the importance of, hey, we still need you to give so that we can continue to operate, but also so we can respond to this crisis and help the community out as well. I mean, there's two aspects to it. But you need to think through all of that carefully, clearly, try to see into the foreseeable future, as much as you can, to say, okay, here's what, it's like chess. You got to know 2 or 3 moves ahead of time to be good at it. And so don't think about what you need to communicate today. Think about what you're going to have to communicate next week. If you're communicating that services are canceled this week, think about what's going to happen next week. Is this a one-time thing? Is it a 1-week thing? Do you need to leave that option open for this to be a 3 or 4 week thing? The travel ban's 30 days. So I would at least say, okay, let's take it at a 30-day chunk. For the next 30 days, here's what our church looks like. And, in an abundance of caution, we're canceling all 4 services, for the next 4 Sundays. It's easier to come back and say, church is back on, everything's fine, than it is to say, no, it's on, now it's off. Now, it's like you need to just be very, very clear. And with things like this, especially if you're canceling Sunday service, it's okay to over communicate. Like, that honestly should go out on every channel. It should be to your email list. It should be on social media. It should be told a couple different times. And that's why you need to make sure you're clear with your decision before you communicate it. Do things you've never done before to kind of disrupt those communications channels. Do a video talking about it instead of just a post. As much as you can to get that out there so people understand, okay, they still can, attend services online. They can still give through this way. If you don't already have those things in place, it's going to be a struggle to write them well. And so my advice is just kind of calm down, take your time with it. It's Thursday. It's okay to get those, communications out tomorrow. Let the hype of today die down, and get that communication out first thing in the morning if you need to, or tomorrow afternoon. I think that's okay. Like, we don't have to be in a gigantic panic here.
Yeah. So how do you feel about, so talking about channels, you mentioned going through multiple channels. You got social media, email, text. Of course, I'm assuming, I'll just ask you since you're the boss. I'm assuming it would be a multi-channel approach, right? You're not going to be like, hey, we posted that to social media. Why are you here?
No. Yeah. Not something like this. I mean, if you're communicating about, Sunday services, not happening or a change in that way, then yeah, you want to do it on multi-channels as much as you can. And over communicate. It's okay to send 2 emails about this. It's okay to post a couple times about this. Like, especially since, I've gotten coronavirus emails from every SaaS product out there that I'm subscribed to. It's like everyone's using this, for one, as an opportunity to create content around a hot topic.
Right.
And 2, they're just, a lot of this stuff is just over panic in a lot of ways. In a lot of ways, it's legit. But I've got 20 emails in my inbox right now that all have to do one way or another with coronavirus. And if one of those is my church saying, Sunday services are canceled, I might miss that. Mm-hmm. And so you want to be able to send, it's okay to send a couple different ways, post it everywhere you can, but not in a panic hype way, but in a just, hey, we want to communicate this well to you.
Yeah. Okay. So the next thing would be that I'm curious about is I saw yesterday, and I talked with another pastor day before that, pastors that are very concerned that giving will go down and they won't be able to make budget.
Yeah.
And these are not pastors of big churches that are like, man, we've got big salaries together. These are rural churches of 50 to 150 that have 2 staff or 3 staff. And they're like, yeah, we're pretty much like 2 weeks of reserves in our bank.
Right. Yeah.
Between rent, if they're a church plant, renting a facility, or just other facility costs, and then the other big one, which is staff salaries.
Yeah.
So if a church, both of these churches I talked to, and then I've seen some other people online, if they have not spent the last 10 years conditioning their people to alternative ways to give other than dropping a 20 in, the plate as it goes by.
Right. Yeah.
What are the easiest tools, or what are the easiest, quickest way for a church to be able to set up an online giving tool if they don't have it already, that they can start to communicate and point people to start giving to in the next 2 to 3 to 4 weeks?
Totally. Yeah. If you don't,
the reason I'm asking is it's a communication part, but you're also really in tune to the giving software community. You know what's going on. So that's
yeah, for sure. I think if you don't have like online giving at all, that's a real bummer moving into something like this, because it's going to be really hard to implement something in time. But there are options. I mean, if I were a church and we didn't have any kind of online giving set up, like you can easily go to a service like Tithely, and within 5 minutes you can get set up. You create a free account, you enter your bank account numbers, so that's where the money's going to be deposited to, and immediately you're given a little button that you can throw up on a website. So you can create a page on your website. You can use any kind of landing page builder if you don't have a website or you don't have access to edit the website. You can put it on your Facebook page, your Twitter. You can send it out through email. But you get that link and you get that button and you put that out. And honestly, that's part of your communication. That should be a big part of your communication is, hey, because of the coronavirus, we have to close Sunday services. The government's making us do this. And just be candid, be open and transparent and candid, and say, hey, a church of our size, this can affect us greatly. We will not be able to make payroll. We will not be able to do this, and this if giving drops down. We're looking into long-term solutions, but for right now, we do have this option. Click here and you can give online, and here's what we will do with that money. And thank you very much for being able to do this. This is secure. This is a great way to give. And honestly, that'll take you 5 minutes to put together. Anyone who clicks that can give with a credit card or a check or an ACH, and it'll go directly into your church bank account. And I would, if that's really a concern that, hey, 2-3 weeks of with a dip in giving will cripple us, then that needs to be communicated. I mean, people need to know that. They're not going to assume it. They're just going to assume everything's fine. And through that, you need to communicate hope, and you need to have hope yourself. I mean, as some encouragement, God knew this was going to happen. God has this. He has your church and your mission in mind, and things are going to work out, but he also wants us to be able to use our brains and use our resources and use the tools that are out there and use them well. So, I mean, there are options. I mean, at a bare minimum, you could throw up a PayPal link and do that. I'm not a big fan of using PayPal for donations and things like that, but that's an option. I mean, there's no reason to say that you can't, get this up in a day and accept donations online. There's just no real reason for it anymore. And then look into those long-term options. I mean, that's why in cases like this, it's going to be a huge, huge win if you have something like that in place already.
Mm-hmm. So when it comes to your experience helping other churches in crisis communication situations, where church attendance sometimes will take a hit because of the crisis. Like people are like, you know what, that's just I'm not into the drama. That's too much drama for me. I'm going to go somewhere else. Or I was personally impacted by whatever bad decision was made, or somebody that failed, or a direction the church went in that was, created a crisis situation, whatever. So from a communications perspective, have you seen a church experience a significant drop in attendance, aside from the one church that you were part of that completely went away?
Right.
I mean, it didn't completely. They just all became independent.
Yeah, we're still going, just not.
You're saying I was literally the last four, one of the last four.
Yeah, 4 staff members. There were still people going to church.
So how do you, as a communicator, talk about dropping attendance and communicate that, communicate hope, communicate health, but also facing and acknowledging the reality of attendance is dropping, whether it's because people realized, hey, I can just like stay home and watch online, or because people are hurt or offended or whatever by whatever crisis happened.
Yeah. So, I mean, I would say in general, there's hardly ever a reason why you would communicate that attendance is dropping. As staff members, as church leaders, you're going to notice because we're tracking those things, we're seeing those things, we're worried about those things, we're seeing the impact of everything. As a churchgoer, they may not really notice or really grasp how many. They go to their service and there might be 20 or 30 less people than last time, but that's kind of, attendance ebb and flows anyway. Now, if half your church is gone, you went from 1,000-person church to a 500-person church, that might be a little more noticeable. But even then, I wouldn't be communicating about the fact that people are leaving. The communications would be around whatever the specific issue is that they're leaving. Communications would be about budget and things. But, at that kind of level, half your church is gone. You're going to be making adjustments anyway. I mean, at that point, you're laying people off. You're canceling certain things that cost money. I mean, that's going to be a lot of things to communicate. But in general, if there's a dip in attendance because of a crisis or something like, say, a moral failure, or pastor got fired for whatever reason or something like that, I would definitely not focus on the attendance part. Continue to give people hope. Continue to be candid about the situation, and communicating as much about it as you can on the appropriate channels. I'm one for Sunday morning is Sunday morning. You do church. Very rarely would you communicate about a crisis in the church through Sunday morning, unless you get to Bill Hybels level. The pastor's gone. The pastor's in national news being accused of something. Obviously that needs to be communicated at a high level there, but very rarely. In fact, when I get calls from churches in a crisis, that's always the first question is, what do we say this Sunday? And it's like, man, you really don't need to. For one, let's get some perspective on the crisis here. Who's actually involved? Who knows about it? Who's actually giving you feedback? One or two people asking questions does not represent your 1,000-person church. That represents one or two people. 50 to 100 people asking questions, that might represent enough to do something about it. So you got to get perspective with everything, but very rarely does it need to be a senior pastor communicating from the main stage type of thing.
Well, it's interesting. So there's a recent thing that happened in my town in Jacksonville. There's a very large historic church in the city that was 30 years ago, 40 years ago, running 30,000, 35,000 people on a weekend. And then over the course of decades, decline to where now they're averaging 3,000 to 3,500, 3,000 to 3,500. That's a 90% drop, right?
Totally.
But it was never addressed and everybody on the outside can see it. They're on TV.
But that wasn't caused by a crisis, right? It was probably caused by a church doing the same old thing for 100 years,
it was a mixture of a crisis and a little big drop, and then they stabilized, and then they just sort of slowly declined because of the massive orchestra that nobody wanted to listen to.
Yeah.
People in Jacksonville were like, I know who he's talking about.
Yeah. I mean, that's what it comes down to. You need to be candid and open about the issues that are in your church. I mean, churches are so quick to want to just mention the very minimum they can get away with. Sometimes they literally do want to just brush things under the rug and try to cover up things, and that's a whole different issue. That's horrible. We need to be open. We are all sinners. It can all point back to the whole reason why we're here. Yes, things are going to happen. That's why we need Jesus. But we need to be open with stuff and trust that God is in control, and not lie and not hold back information, because that's the worst thing that can happen, is that you communicate something as minimal as possible, but then it continues to blow up, and then a week later you got to say, okay, well, here's what really happened, or here's more that you need to know. And then you're communicating about it just over and over and over, and you're through that process blowing it up bigger than it actually needs to be or could have been.
So
in
that brings
most
me,
cases, it's easy to just get out and say, here's what happened. Here's what our plan is. Here's what we need from you.
yeah.
Very rarely is there just something you should not talk about.
Yeah. So how do you communicate hard things, whether it's crisis or just like hard realities? Like this is something we've just not talked about for the last couple of years. We need to talk about. How do you
Yeah.
talk about it in a frank, honest way, um, without spin, like
Yeah.
spinning it, whatever, and
Yeah.
also without just like depressing everybody in the room or everybody that gets the email or whatever. Like whatever the crisis is, how do you
Right.
how do you talk about it with in positivity and hope, but not it being just another spin thing? I think people's spin radar is
Right.
heightened now.
Totally.
Like
Yeah.
they
Totally.
like everybody's ready for spin. Like every
Yeah.
piece of communication you get is gonna have spin on it. People's
Yeah.
spin radars is through the roof. So how do you do it without triggering that spin radar?
I think the the key is, and this sounds so stupid, but is just to tell the truth. If you're telling the truth, then it's going to come out as truth. If you're trying to spin it, if you're trying to only tell the minimum, or you're trying to make it brighter than it really is, people are definitely going to catch on to that. And so I think you need to tell the truth. You need to be blunt. You need to be candid and open. If there's something you can't share for legal reasons, or because it might harm someone, or whatever the reason, at least be candid about that. Say, hey, I can't share this with you because of this. And, so often churches just want to not say anything, or say no comment, or say, like, you should never be in a position where you're hiding something and not telling people why. Like, for example, we, at one point, everyone, Mark Driscoll's salary was under scrutiny, and people were leaking what it was, and everyone wanted to know for sure what it was. And people were demanding, as church members, or as a deacon, as an elder, I demand to know what he's making. And I think he should be making this, and someone else I should be making this. And unfortunately, our stance was just to not even reply to those things. I was the one kind of raising my hand saying, look, of course we're not going to tell him how much he makes. Like, that's a private, personal HR matter. No one's going to know what I make. No one's going to know what you make. Like, we don't share people's salaries.
Right. Publicly traded.
And as a church, we didn't have to put, like Compassion International, you go to their website, it says what they are, because they're a nonprofit. A church is handled differently, and, for privacy reasons. But, we should have been able to communicate, okay, here's why we're not going to tell you. Thank you for the question. We understand your concern. Here's why we're not going to tell you. Here's what's in place, though. There is a board, internally and externally, that sets his salary, and here's the process for that. You try to communicate what you can and be as transparent with what you can as much as possible. Otherwise, people are just going to make up their own story. They're going to make up their own assumptions, and they're going to think you're hiding something from them. You're not being honest with them. So, I mean, it's just like communicating anything. You got to be honest. You got to be open. You got to speak from the heart. As churches and pastors, we do want to always lead everything towards hope in Jesus, that it's going to be okay. But if your church is declining, if giving is down, people need to know that. They need to know what the needs are. They need to be encouraged to step up if they haven't been giving and things like that. That needs to come from a biblical perspective, not a perspective of fear or intimidation or, anything like that, but just lay out what the Bible says, lay out what God is teaching you and moving in you through the Holy Spirit, and end with the hope, not in a cheesy, spinny way, but in a realistic, hey, this is where we're at kind of way. And I think people, especially in today's world, will appreciate that kind of bluntness and honesty, rather than, they'll know when you're just spitting out a corporate pre-written response to things now. It's just not the way the church should be operating. We kind of accept that and are okay with that from businesses and corporations, even though we hate that too. But honestly, when I get an email from a startup that's from the founder, and he's just openly honest about something, man, I am a loyal customer to something like that, as opposed to just a generic email that didn't even address my personal concerns or needs,
Mm-hmm. Yeah, for sure.
I think we can learn from that for sure.
Yeah. Okay. All right. So two more things.
Sure.
Right. Are you ready to enter the lightning round? I miss game shows that had lightning rounds.
I hated those.
Well, you're about to be in one. All right. Ready? This is a share your opinion lightning round.
All right.
Okay. And I know that you have lots of relationships in a lot of these spaces. So
And a lot of opinions.
yeah, a lot of opinions. So many opinions that you actually split your social media.
I have two personalities on Twitter now because people were like, hey, half the people were like, man, I don't care about your ChurchCom stuff. I just want to know what you think about this, this, and this. The other half were like, please don't ever post that again. I follow you for this. So I'm like, fine.
Yeah, I'll give you split it for you. Okay.
Yeah.
So, do you think pastors should do that?
I think in general, pastors need to have a personality on social media. They should be approachable on social media. So, Hebrews 13 says that people called to a pastor elder role should be on display. People should be able to look to a pastor and say, that's how my marriage should be. That's how my business should be run. That's how my life should be. That's how I should be talking to people about Jesus. Everything should be on display. There should also be boundaries and borders around that. You're entitled to your own privacy. You're entitled to your own security. You're entitled to your own feelings and times to go cry or whatever. Like there's boundaries you can put around that. But your life, certainly, you're called to be a pastor. You're called to be a leader. You're called to that position. You should be on display. So it really drives me nuts when pastors are like, no, everything should just be through the church channels. It drives me even more nuts when committees and boards want everything to be through the church brand because they don't want it to be about the pastor. What if he leaves? What if he goes over here or whatever? And it's like, man, there's no trust there. There's no trust in your people. There's no trust in God that what you're doing is what you should be doing.
It's even worse when the church email addresses are like pastor at church domain, student
right.
at church.
It could be anybody.
Like, an interchangeable.
We can swap this guy in and out all we want. Like,
disposable.
Yeah, that's horrible.
We want to keep the email longer than we want to keep the pastor.
Right, I know. Yeah, and I think it should be the opposite. I think that you've got to be careful about the celebrity pastor type of thing. Hopefully, the pastor called to that position is humble and has things in place for accountability and things like that. All that needs to be, addressed. But like look at Trey Van Camp. He's a pastor who documents his life on YouTube and on social media in a very creative way, and he helps promote the church that he's at as well. But honestly, he could move to a different church and he'd have a platform and a following for him too, and the church would be fine and have their own platform too. But people are able to see into his life. They're able to see how real it is. They're able to see the things he struggles with, the things that he's learning, the things he's able to teach others. And I think that's incredible. It's way more impactful, particularly because church is a lot more than just an hour on Sunday morning. It's, it should be ingrained into our lives and something that we can follow throughout the week. Your church and your pastor should be able to engage with people throughout the week. There's no way discipleship happens during a 1 hour sermon on Sunday and hey Bob, how's it going? How's the kids? Finger shooting in the hallway as you're passing to your car to go to lunch. Like that's not discipleship making, but that's what we're called to do. That's what happens in community groups throughout the week. That's what happens through social media throughout the week. That's what happens with communicating to your people through all the different channels throughout the week. And so, yeah, I think pastors need to be on social media. Honestly, I would say your pastor should have a Twitter account before your church does. Like, who cares about what your church wants to put out? I want to hear from real people. I want to connect with real people.
Okay. So, but he shouldn't split his churchy stuff, which from
depends
his
on what he's saying.
guns and politics.
Honestly, a pastor, and even with my own stuff, like I should have more discipline and not have to do that, but it's hard for me because I want to be able to express my own opinions about politics and things like that. But it's true. Like I've built this audience of people who are following me for church communications and PR help, or they're fans of the conference and things like that. And they're following that for that stuff to help their church. They really can care less about my opinions on guns and Jeeps and food and politics and other stuff. And they honestly could probably care less about my family and my pictures of my kids and things like that. So yeah, I split that off so that I can be able to have a personal brand and have a business brand, really. But I don't know that that's would really be effective for a pastor. A pastor really needs to be the same person on stage that he is in person, and that should all just be part of the whole package.
Yeah. Yeah. Okay. Next question. The lightning round is already going a little slow. I'm gonna pick it up.
Sorry. Just shut me up.
That's okay. For a pastor or other staff, or for a church, Snapchat, thumbs up or thumbs down?
Oh, I hate Snapchat. Snapchat's horrible. So
go
to sundaymag.tv. I wrote an article on Snapchat. It used to be okay, but then they created this content that's from Teen Vogue and Cosmopolitan and everything. There's literally articles that say, don't tell your parents about this, but here's how to have an abortion without them knowing. Here's why your breasts aren't growing. Here's how to know if you're a boy or a girl. Like those kind of topics geared towards teenagers in a way that's purposely encouraging them to hide it from their parents and things. And it has nothing to do with people sharing pictures with each other on the platform. You can do that through text messaging. This is all about Snapchat pushing that content to its users and having no way to opt out of it. You don't have to follow Teen Vogue to see that stuff. It's just pushed to you. And it's like pornographic images, but it's, soft porn, but it's that content that these people, these kids, really that's who's using it, is teenagers. They have access to it. And so it really ticks me off when like a youth group says, follow us on Snapchat, and starts putting out content there, because really what they're saying is it's okay to be on there. We encourage it. And, even if they say ignore those articles, it's like, no, you can't ignore it. It's pushed to you. Mm-hmm. And sure, you can find that content on Facebook. You can find that content on Instagram, but you have to go and find it. It's not pushed to you. That's the difference. So as long as they have that, like Snapchat's a hard no for my kids, and it's a hard no for churches, in my opinion.
Okay. TikTok. You thumbs up, thumbs down for TikTok for church or a pastor?
I kind of love TikTok. It's really cool. I think everyone's blown it up as like it's going to be this next big mainstream thing. It will never be a mainstream thing. People, I'm pushing 40 and I've got 4 kids, and I'm not going to create content on TikTok, but yeah, it's fun to watch every once in a while. Huh?
You're not going to do lip syncs and dance?
I'm not doing lip sync battles and stuff. I'm just not that cool. And it's just never going to be content that, is going to be everyday content for people. I don't think there's anything wrong or sinful on it, really. When I open it, I haven't kicked in the algorithms yet because I don't use it enough. So it's all, teenage girls dancing in their pajamas. It's not completely inappropriate, but if I like really got into that and was always watching it, that'd be a little weird. Apparently, the more you use it, the more people you follow, the content changes, but I don't want to have to push through all that stuff just to get it to be useful for me. But that's who's creating the content. The older millennials will never be mainstream users of it. Is it a cool platform? Yes. Are kids using it? Yes. Your churches should definitely be experimenting with it if you're already doing everything else right. If not, it's not even something that you have to worry about. It's not a huge opportunity. And others will tell you, hey, we uploaded a baptism video and it got 300 million views. That's awesome. If you have the resources to do that and you're doing everything else well, great. But there's never going to be a way to engage with people easily on TikTok. Yeah, all those people saw that great content, but I don't really know what that means or how useful that really actually is. But there's also nothing wrong with it. So if you want to do that, totally do it. I think it's fine. As long as they don't start pushing out stupid articles like Snapchat, should be fine. But it's something to watch, because right now TikTok's not making any money. And just like Snapchat, they'll have to figure out a way to make money. And the only way to make money on these networks is through ads and partnerships with people like that. So I guess we'll just have to wait and see.
Okay. Favorite, or are you thumbs up on generally on live streaming services online?
Yeah, I think it's a great way to reach more people with your message. There's definitely some real world scenarios where people want to be able to watch online. Even, we attend every Sunday, but every once in a while, it's nice to be able to watch online if people are sick, or, we've got a special needs daughter. Sometimes we just can't make it. It's nice to have that option. What I don't like is when churches are pushing it as like its own campus. Like you're the online people, you only watch online, because it's really hard to get them to engage in community with each other. It's hard to build discipleship that way. A couple churches are doing it well, though. Like Saddleback has more people in community groups than they do attending Sunday morning, because people all over the world will watch the live stream, and they're encouraged left and right to get into a physical community in their area where they can do church together. And I think that that's great. If you have that kind of large, scale plan to push people into community and be church together, then it's totally fine. I don't think anywhere in the Bible does it say make sure you hold a weekly gathering and bring people into one building.
Yeah.
Like that's just not a requirement, but it's a very effective way to do church, to preach the gospel, to invite people in. So I think it's a model that works, but online's not anything that's evil.
Okay. So do you prefer streaming for a church, stream to a Facebook or to YouTube or to Instagram? Like, I guess Instagram is
honestly, I would I would stream on your website and promote it through those channels. Like when we watch our church's stuff, we'll do it on a replay. We're not really doing it live anyway. So I've never really been one to like watch it on Facebook. I'm not going to gather the family around and watch Facebook, even though they have like an Apple TV app. We just never use it. YouTube would be great, but I mean, honestly, put it out on all the channels. Who cares? You might get more views that way, but the messaging during it needs to be, hey, this isn't church. Like this is a message, and it's great that you're watching it, but go be the church, and here's how to do that.
Okay. Facebook group or Facebook page? I mean, this is like basic questions, but
pages have gone the way of you need a page in order to put ads up and to have a space that people search for, but it really doesn't matter what you post on there. Groups are an incredible way to engage with people on a number of different ways. I wish churches were using groups more granular, like finding the niches and the needs in your church and creating groups for that, and having those being run by the churches. Like there should be groups for parents of kids with special needs. That should be a group at our church, like someone should be managing that and running that. Things like that would be incredible ways for the church to engage with their community.
So the page is really just a profile to be able to be found.
Yeah, the page is really just a place on Facebook to be able to find your church. A lot of people will search on Facebook before they're even like searching Google or Google Maps or something. So it's definitely wise to have a presence there, but actively posting something there every day is not really so much a concern anymore. Even if people follow that page, they're just not going to see that content.
Okay. And your favorite website builder for churches?
Website builder?
Website builder.
Our friend Tyler Rominger over at Ministry Designs, they just launched a website builder called Omega, and it's pretty incredible. I've had a chance to look at it. I'm really digging that. The Church Co., Paul Cox and his company have a really great website builder there. Personally, I'm a big fan of build a WordPress site, use something like Elementor or Divi that makes it easy. And then you have full control over it. You can do a lot of different things with it, but it really just comes down to your needs. If you're wanting to live stream and put your sermons up and do podcasting through your website and stuff like that, then you might need something more robust like WordPress. If you just need a place for people to find information about your church and your service times and things like that, then any one of those website builders is going to do the trick. Not a big fan of Squarespace or Wix or those things because they're just so limited and they're not really built for churches. They don't give you the scale to be able to build onto it. Like the Church Co. and Omega, they both are built purposely to be able to scale and do whatever you want with your website. They just make it a little easier to manage.
All right, I think that's the end of the lightning round. Where should people go to get more from of the stuff that you produce?
So we've got a new site, sunday2sunday.com. So sunday.com. Everything we do, we say we help churches thrive from Sunday to Sunday. So it's not just about Sunday morning. That's great. We provide resources for that, but we want churches to engage with people from Sunday to Sunday. So if you go to sunday2sunday.com, you'll see everything we do from, that church conference, to our online events, to our membership sites and things like that. We do a lot to resource churches with things that just help them do their jobs better, particularly those in communications and marketing roles.
Okay, so that people can get access to your book there, to membership sites where there's more education and ongoing learning for communication stuff. You've got a resources site where people can get access to communications resources, right?
Yeah, so courageousstorytellers.com is a monthly membership that we offer, and every month we're loading people up with social media images to use, sermon design kits. So if you don't have a graphic design team or a video team and you want to put a branded sermon series together, we provide those every month. We got a whole library of them, and then just documents and templates, everything to kind of do your job for you as much as we can.
Sweet. And then there's the conference. When does that happen every year?
September 22nd and 23rd of this year will be our 6th annual conference. Expecting about 1,000 people this year. We've got over 25 breakout sessions to choose from on different topics. It's going to be a pretty big one. I'm pretty excited for it.
Okay, cool. This will be the biggest one you've had, right?
Yeah, biggest one. Yeah.
Under 500, right?
Yeah, last year we were at 330, which was the capacity of the room we rented. And so this year we decided, let's rent the biggest room we can get and see where it goes. We've already got 300 tickets sold this year, so we're well on our way. Okay. And I think we'll definitely get to 1,000, no problem. We're still going to do the conference despite the coronavirus. I think we're definitely far enough out that hopefully we'll be past that. But
dude, if we're still
also have branded hand sanitizer for everyone.
Yeah. If we're still locked down with no events by September, ooh.
That could be.
I think we all get in trouble.
We'll be the least of the worries if we're still talking about this by then.
All right, man. Thanks so much for your time, brother.
No, I appreciate it.